about what things companies do successfully and what things need help. One of the things I want to focus on is a survey that was done by an IT company called AIM that actually reached out to 600 SharePoint corporations that were using SharePoint to help them determine, to get information about how SharePoint was being used successfully and what were some of the holes that people were finding in SharePoint. So this slide right here talks about some of the issues that most people are finding in their implementations of SharePoint. And if you're like most companies, SharePoint typically gets implemented in a silo fashion. Either it starts in a department like IT, and then it slowly spreads to other departments within a company. Or if you slice it a different way, it starts with the intent of becoming a document management solution and then spreads out for other purposes within a company. And so you'll see the number one problem that people have is a lack of strategic planning on how to use SharePoint. That's not uncommon. In fact, most companies realize that when you install SharePoint, that it sort of defaults to a taxonomy. And we've seen a lot of companies that just stick with that taxonomy as it was started and have not taken a step back to see how it should be implemented. The second reason, and what we're talking about today, is more wrapped around governance. Once SharePoint has been spread throughout an organization, you start to realize that how it's used should be monitored and managed by a company. This is mainly because SharePoint is a decentralized tool that gives control to users throughout your organization. This particular slide right here talks about compliance within an organization and how compliance needs are being met within SharePoint. And I don't know how well you can see the colors on your screen, but you can see that a lot of companies fail to adequately bring SharePoint into compliance. And when I talk about compliance, I'm thinking of compliance as a subset of governance. I put in a lot of people are confused about what governance means, so I spent a lot of time figuring out how to boil it down into three concepts. So essentially, governance is user guidance, technology warranty, and information assurance. Probably the most important of those is the user guidance because, as I said earlier, SharePoint is a decentralized tool. And so there is going to be a lot of training that needs to go into teaching people what they can and can't do and how to use the product. The technology warranty is related more to how you manage keeping SharePoint up and active. And then information assurance, which is some of what we're talking about today, is how to make sure that people are putting the correct things into SharePoint and how to avoid putting information that the corporation does not want to appear in a SharePoint portal, or more importantly, that is being permitted to people who shouldn't see information, whether that's personally identifiable information or HIPAA compliance information, and tools that can be used to help that. Out of the box, there really is not a lot built into SharePoint to help manage that, which is why B2B Technologies recommends using the third-party tool from a company like AvePoint. With that, I'd like to hand the presentation off to Andrew McDevitt, who is a compliance expert.
Thank you. And Andrew, are you able to have control over the screen at this moment? Andrew, it seems that we're not able to hear you. Andrew, could you take yourself off mute?
Can everyone hear me?
There we go. Yes, yep. Andrew, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I tried to unmute myself and I wasn't successful, so it sounds like I have been now. So I apologize for that. Again, my name is Andrew McDevitt. I'm a compliance solution specialist with AvePoint, and my subject matter expertise is in data privacy and data protection. So let me just dive in, and I'll give you a brief overview and a primer to our Compliance Guardian demonstration. And I want to thank B2B for partnering with us today to have this dialogue about how we work with compliance and governance within the SharePoint environment. So let's just dive in and begin. So AvePoint is not new to the SharePoint environment, and we have learned from the market leaders and have a strong relationship and partnership with Microsoft. We've been involved with the SharePoint environment since the days of Tahoe, and we started out as a backup and recovery solution, and we've migrated into a variety of different areas of SharePoint governance, including compliance archiving, e-discovery, and such. And so we're not new to this, and we have a very strong commitment towards helping SharePoint users, especially our customers, and helping with our partner relationships to build an environment where we can empower people to have greater governance and compliance within the SharePoint space. And I think this is really a timely conversation to have, and that you're taking the time to listen to this dialogue today, and hopefully we'll have some good Q&A at the end. I think when you contemplate what's happening in the marketplace in general with technology and data, we're living in the era of big data, and we're migrating more to cloud computing and having a hybrid environments where we're storing information and governing it on-site and in the cloud. There's a lot to contemplate today to come up with a governance posture and compliance posture as to how do we get our hands around this, and especially in the context if you're a SharePoint user. So, you know, we have, for example, many of us intellectual property-oriented data that we need to protect. Obviously, the focus in the media and many organizations is personal information and healthcare information for healthcare-oriented organizations. The banking world, of course, is worried about PII in relation to their banking customers. But I think the other thing, too, is that we have to focus on is that we're really trying to empower people to have access to the data they need, but keep it away from those that shouldn't have it. And, you know, I know that in the government sector, too, we have issues where there's just information that is being vetted and created, especially if it's a government type of program, and that information shouldn't be public until it's been solidified and then released to the public for consumption. So there's those type of issues that need to be addressed and contemplated in the context of data. And this is kind of one of AvePoint's mantras, and I really like to share this because I think it's really important. And I'll read this only because I think it's a major takeaway from the type of work that we're trying to fulfill and the value proposition that we're trying to offer to SharePoint users. And that is, We want information to be accessible and available to the people who should have it, and protected from the people that shouldn't. And furthermore, this information needs to be stored and archived and preserved for some period of time, and that's very typical. And that's because there are a lot of regimes of compliance and regulation that dictate that organizations maintain and keep their data for specific times, whether maybe you are an organization that has a tax function or you're providing tax services to clients. It's really critical then that you comply with laws that may come from the Department of Treasury, or it may come from the Internal Revenue Service or another government entity. So there is some data retention issues, and the more that we hold on to data, and the longer that we hold on to data, we have to protect it. And if it's in SharePoint, we need to have a mechanism in place to ensure that we do that, and fulfill that obligation of protecting it. And so I like to share this slide because I think it's really important, and it's a really good illustration of why we need to focus on compliance and governance, and the fact that in our day-to-day lives, if we're risk managers or in charge of compliance of something within our organization, and you need to focus on this, is that generally speaking, without the right and adequate tools, we kind of know of our risks that may be apparent on the surface, but we don't have a full picture or the context of our full risk landscape. And so this is a really good illustration, an iceberg in the ocean. I mean, we can see what's above the surface and try to address it as best as we can, but at the end of the day, if we don't know how large or the scope is of our risk, and in the context of SharePoint, that's the data that resides within the various farms within our entities, it can be very problematic to have a full scope of what our true compliance posture needs to be. How do we react to the changes in the environment? Who is not complying with our stated compliance and governance policies and procedures? And so that therein is really the problem, especially with SharePoint, is the fact that we don't have this because it is not native in the application itself. And so I think this illustrates why we need to focus on this. And so I want to also highlight a few things that we need to consider of risks. We obviously have to contemplate issues related to confidentiality. We're seeing that more in the space. We've had a recent instance that was made public for a major financial media company in which there was some confidentiality about users of their services that made it into the press, and that has not been a very good outcome for that entity. You have the concept of data integrity, and I think over the last decades in particular, we've seen a lot of focus, especially from government regulators and within publicly traded companies as it relates to SOX compliance, that we store data in different areas of our entity, and we need to preserve the integrity of that data for a variety of reasons. And so having the ability to know whom and when they actually access information and change it is very important, and having that ability to comply with laws and regulations that govern that data integrity is pretty important. I think the other thing too is that we have to work towards a landscape in which we can provide information to those that need it so that they can conduct their job and do it adequately, and their work, and making sure that they're performing this optimally. And so that's another factor, is identity management and permissions to data within the SharePoint environment. And then lastly, there's a growing body of laws and regulations globally, and a focus on accessibility. And when I talk in terms of accessibility or accessible information, there are people within our society that may have various visual or hearing impairments that still need to have access to information and to be able to conduct commerce just like anyone else. And especially in government and in certain verticals like healthcare as well as financial services, we need to make information accessible to our customers that may have these impairments, but nonetheless they need to be equally have access to this information because it's the right thing to do, and there are laws and structures that mandate this. And so this is another sensitivity that we need to contemplate. And let me just go through, and a lot of you already know this, but it's just for illustrative purposes. You know, we know a lot of the benefits of SharePoint, its broad capabilities, its enabling factor to really have true collaboration amongst those that are using it. We live in a day now where many of us are knowledge workers, and access to information empowers those knowledge workers to do the work they need to do. So, and this has become part of our social business fabric. And it also gives us a little bit better of an idea of how and the way in which we can govern and comply with the various laws. There are some tools to doing this, but it isn't comprehensive. But as we go to this next slide, here are some of the challenges. And I think this is really critical that I point this out, is that, as it was alluded to earlier, SharePoint, where it started out as just a tool for small groups or teams to collaborate, has now become really the de facto enterprise content management system that's in many cases a global system for many organizations. And so that's the reality that we're dealing with today. We then have to worry about spillage. So is data getting into areas that it shouldn't, both internally and externally from your enterprise, and who's having access to that, and the administration of that, and that's very important too. And of course, the access and identity management component of that, coming up with enforceability of your actual stated data and system governance preferences and policies, and then the whole dynamic that this is happening real time throughout an enterprise all the time, and that's very critical. So the message here is this is really truly a balancing act for the risk management and compliance team that you may belong to or in your environment that you interface with on a day-to-day basis. And what you're really, at the bottom line, trying to balance accessibility, transparency, and the ability for your enterprise to truly collaborate, while at the same time with the body of laws and regulations that exist and that are emerging, and the expectations of individuals internally and externally about their privacy, the data protection, and the management of this data. It truly is this balancing act that we're trying to find the sweet spot for, not only with our stated policies, but tools that will permit us to actually follow through with what we're saying, the say-do quotient. And so I think at the end of the day here is that with this balancing act, we have to balance this accessibility and security of the data. We have to find a means in which we can accurately identify documents and classify them so that we can determine who has rights to them, who can see and not see them, and change them or access them. We have policies in our organizations about confidentiality and making sure that those are enforced, and the integrity of the information within the documents, and understanding the different roles of all the individuals at play here as to who has access, when, why, and how. And I think this is really an important thing to convey to you all, is that it's, at the end of the day, we really have to trust the people and the policies and the technology that we're using, but at the same time, we have to verify that whole concept of trust and verify, but verify. And then we have to do this through a mechanism where we can find out whether we are adequately training our staff about all of our policies and procedures, managing our governance programs, and having the technological enforcement to ensure that we're actually doing what we say that our stated goal is. And that's equally critical. So let me briefly go into AvePoint's solution Compliance Guardian, talk a little bit about our mindset around this, and then I will pass it on to Ashish to do the demonstration. And really the focus and what we believe is this is a real life cycle of the solution that we're offering with our tool Compliance Guardian. And essentially what we want to do is prevent all the things that we don't want to happen in our environment, especially in SharePoint. And the product essentially utilizes technology to detect the various vulnerabilities as well as any kind of non-compliance of policies and procedures, and this is out of the box and it can be customized. It also has a means in which it can track going forward once implemented, the ability to track trends in which you can see within your environment whether things are improving or changing, and then pivot quickly to respond and resolve to those changes so that you can focus on the largest problem areas of your governance and compliance within the SharePoint environment, and then you can methodically keep going into this cycle so that you can really focus on that part of the iceberg that's underneath the waterline. So let me just briefly go into what Compliance Guardian does. It scans your environment real-time or in a schedule that's deemed appropriate for yourself. It looks for visible and invisible content, text or element-based information, and it can include and exclude various types of data sets to minimize false positives with our filters. It has some robust reporting, and I'll let you look at those, the bullets below, as well as it really gives you the ability from those reports to act, and it does this in some ways in an automated way, but it also can give you some choices as to how you can communicate to site owners within your SharePoint environment to move, delete, quarantine, and reclassify and then secure them as you see fit. And I think the other thing I wanted to share before I pass it on to the demonstration is that it has a modular architecture, so it has a content scanner through an API that also has a compliance engine and a reporting engine. And it does all of it crawls through your content source within SharePoint, and we're going to be migrating out of SharePoint. It checks against defined conditions using AvePoint testing language, and it checks for content elements, framework, and with some context. And so it's a very powerful tool. I'm looking forward to having you have the opportunity today to actually see it in action. And before I do that, let me just define what I think this solution AvePoint can do for your environment, because I think there's some traditional stakeholders here that need to be in play with this. You have your information technology group that's really more focused on the administration. Obviously, you have compliance officers and risk management folks that are wanting to enforce the total compliance and risk management data governance protocols within your organization through whatever technology that may be. And then, of course, you have the business people, and sometimes they all have different conflicting views and conflicting methods and focuses. And what our hope is that this product will be able to bring them all together through the solutions, the reporting, the mechanisms in place that can help all of these stakeholders come together to mitigate the risk that everybody's trying to focus on mitigating. So let me pass it on, and we'll continue with the presentation through the demo of Compliance Guardian. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. This is the slide for the offer. We're actually going to come back to that at the end, and we're going to go ahead and get this kicked over to Ashish so that he can show us the demo.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks, B2B, for letting us present. I'm going to go over the Compliance Guardian tool. It is a separate platform than SharePoint itself, so bear with me while I get this up and loaded. All right, perfect. And are you guys able to see the Compliance Guardian screen? Or?
At the moment, we have a black screen.
Okay. Sorry, guys. It says it's paused.
Okay, we're seeing, I think it's coming up now.
All right, are we good? Are we able to see it now?
I think we are.
We see the sign-in
Okay.
screen.
Okay, perfect. All right, guys, so thank you. This is the Compliance Guardian version 3. It is the third iterative version of this tool itself. It is a separate platform than SharePoint itself. So what I mean by that is, we're not integrated into SharePoint. And the reason we want to do that is we want to be aggregate through different platforms. So we could, through our timeline for the year includes Exchange, file shares, SAP as well. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. If you notice, I'm actually logging in leveraging my AD credentials. A use case for using my AD credentials would be to security trim Compliance Guardian as a whole. So what this allows you to do is security trim maybe a certain business unit wants to come in and just view reports and not have access to do the schedule classification or real-time classification itself. They can come in and do that. We do take that client-server approach from the platform itself. So you're looking at the manager portion itself. It can be installed on any VM, any server environment you want. We actually connect the databases on the back end. So as far as reporting, the control service, everything's connected to a database. It's just an IIS website as well. So you can open this up anywhere within your network, DNS it to a certain URL, and anyone can open it up. It could be SSL scripted as well. I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple things right off the bat. We did incorporate that tile look and feel, kind of like Windows 8 itself. Now, as Andrew mentioned, we do have something called test definition files. And what these test definition files allow you to do is scan documents, scan actual physical content coming into SharePoint, as well as retroactively, because we all know we don't know what's out there right now. And here's some examples of these TDFs, test definition files that we created. It actually allows you to scan files 40 times faster than regular expressions. Now, we do have a bunch of pre-canned scripts within here. For example, if I go into health information rules and go ahead and view the details of it, it has all these various TDFs within there, and I can enable these different different units within it. So I can identify social security numbers, medical records, whatever I want. And as Andrew mentioned, we do have several subject matter experts from a compliance standpoint on staff. So we'll actually come on site and help you implement this in your environment. Talk to business units, interview security personnel as well, to go ahead and create a TDF catered to your needs. As I go ahead and go back I can actually select a TDF collection. Once I select the TDF collection, I can go ahead and select the scope itself. So what I mean by selecting the scope is we have the ability to do a scheduled classification, which is going to retroactively scan the content already in SharePoint. It also currently works for connected file shares as well. From a personal experience, I'm currently working with a pretty major airport, and they basically are connecting fast search, and this gives you the ability to search those connected file shares. So I'm going to go into real-time classification itself. Now, on the left-hand side, we can select the scope. This works currently for 2007, 2010, as well as 2013. We can scan multiple farms at the same time with the same rules. It doesn't matter if it's 2007, 2010, or 2013. We can apply the exact same logic on all your farms. You can even security trim the tool so a user may log in and only have access to a certain farm, or only run reports against a certain farm as well. So on the left-hand side, I could go ahead and select the scope. So let's say I could just go ahead and select the entire web front end on the left-hand side and this entire web app. I can actually go ahead and create a rule. This is in real time itself. Maybe I wanted to filter out metadata. If you currently classify documents, for instance, you could filter out any document that is classified as not restricted. Or you just want to filter in any document that has metadata saying highly restricted. Now the scan policy. The scan policy is those PDFs that we load in itself. So we'll go ahead and add in whatever TDS from whatever that collection manager might be, your custom searches, and we'll load it straight through here. Once we select our scan policy, we can actually alert. So if that scan is triggered, if it finds PII information, ITAR information, anything that you specify, we can actually alert the creator, alert the modifier, or go ahead and email a specific user, maybe HR or the security team itself. Now, what do we do with that document? We scanned it, we found that it had PII information, for instance, or various other attributes, maybe general ledger attributes. What we could do now is create an action policy. And based on whatever it scans, we could actually move it to a specific location. Maybe you want to move it to a different document library. I know in the public sector, we deal with ITAR a lot, and this allows us, we have customers using this to move anything that has ITAR information to a different web application. We can even quarantine files. We can quarantine it to a different location outside of SharePoint. Anything with the UNC path, we can actually quarantine directly. Or maybe you just want to delete the files right away. Maybe there's certain elements that you were saying within IT that you cannot have uploaded within SharePoint or a file share. We go ahead and delete it right away. And my favorite part is the ability to change permissions. So I could change permissions and reclassify that document upon upload. So if Andrew went ahead and uploaded a document that had PII information, I want to make sure it's automatically going to change the permissions so only a certain group has access to that document. And then we'll go ahead and send a notification to that group owner or to Andrew itself. Now, we can also classify the documents upon upload. So if it had PII information, ITAR information, general ledger information, we could put in metadata into the files. Now, what I mean by put in metadata, we could either do SharePoint metadata. Maybe you had a metadata column that said, restriction type, high, low, medium. Or we could also put in embedded metadata. Embedded metadata is, if you all know, if you download a file from SharePoint locally and go to the properties in Office, embedded metadata will be stuck to the document. So when people are emailing documents back and forth, the embedded metadata will be within there. Kind of going on here, this is the real time. So this is for documents coming into SharePoint itself. If I go back up here, I could do scheduled as well. Scheduled as well is going to be retroactively searching documents. Retroactively searching your connected file shares as well. Giving you the ability to see what's already in SharePoint itself. Now maybe you just wanted to search for it. We have the ability to do that as well and not perform any action. If you wanted to just figure out maybe a heat index per se, we can definitely do that within Compliance Guardian. So as you can see, it's a very powerful tool. Powerful in the sense that I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the reports that come out of this. Some major reports that we see here are to kind of give a heat assessment. I could go ahead and look at my scan policy, and let's say I select HIPAA and PHI. I go ahead and hit OK. And once I hit OK, based on that policy filter, it's going to give me my violation report. Now, every one of these reports you can download to a UNC path, email to an end user, publish out to a document library, as well as export out to a screenshot itself. In addition, you could have basically security personnel log into Compliance Guardian and only have access to this reporting feature. Only have access to the reporting feature within a certain scope as well. Now, if you look at these violation reports, I can hover over. It'll show me how many files are infected with this violation. Now, this is really key for documents already in SharePoint itself. If you just want to know how many documents in a certain web app has PHI information, ITAR information, or various other regular expressions, we can search for that itself. Now we also have the ability to create a trend report straight through here. And this is kind of nice because it gives you the ability to go ahead and see, obviously we just deployed this in April, but we can see the trend report over the course of a period of time. You know, I know a lot of times IT standards are coursed by metrics, so you'll be able to see what the trending was over the course of the past year. And of course, we can export this out to a UNC path or email it to an end user. Kind of moving on here, we even have the ability to set a risk report. And what that risk report might mean is, you know, maybe for instance, we set a risk value of 10 to anything that's PHI. But if it's just curse words or swear words, that's a risk value of 1. So we can determine what your risk level in your environment is, and based on file location itself. I can even do file type reports. You know, how many ASPX pages, how many PDFs are in here, how many XLS pages. Now everything is defined on whatever my scope is. So this isn't necessarily farm-wide, corporate-wide, system-wide. It could just be on an individual scope. And what's really nice about that is a lot of times people only care about violations on maybe a public-facing extranet and don't care about internal. We could actually just scope it out to that public-facing extranet. So kind of going on here, within the control panel itself, a couple things I do want to mention is, you know, we can export out every one of these settings and reports to a solution deployed in SharePoint. If you didn't want end users or admins to access this on a separate web application, we do have the ability to create a web part within SharePoint itself. Now, everything is audited within this tool as well. So if you have several power users or security professionals logging into the tool and set up different plans, you'll be able to see who logged in and set up what plan. And a couple other things, this isn't dependent on DocAv. You know, DocAv is AvePoint's flagship product. This is a completely separate tool, completely independent. And if you notice how this is set up, this doesn't require SharePoint either. You know, moving down the road, we want to be able to manage every legacy system, Lotus, Exchange, anything. We're willing to build it for you. Kind of going on, we do have the ability to security trim as a whole. So what I mean by that is you can leverage SharePoint permissions. So if a user logs in, you just want them to run reports on what they have permission to in SharePoint, we can pull that up as well. So it's a pretty powerful tool in that regard. You know, I'm going to go ahead and pass back over to Jennifer, I believe, for some questions, and you know, we'll kind of go on from there.
All right, great. Thanks, Ashish. Let me get back over to the correct screen here. Okay. After, you know, we've heard from Matt and Andrew and Ashish, thank you all for sharing all the information. We do have an offer for all the attendees who joined us today, and it's a combined offer from AvePoint and B2B for a 2-hour consultation to find out where you're currently at in your compliance needs and what criteria you need for your environment. The offer will cover a discussion on what compliance legislation applies specifically to your organization, explore other organizationally unique information management needs that you have, and understand how B2B and AvePoint can help mitigate your compliance risk factors. You are more than welcome to contact me. It's jcollum@b2btech.com, or you can call my office line directly to schedule your 2 hours of free consultation. And then we do have a couple of steps to move you forward after that if you want to engage with us, and we would be more than happy to work with you. So thank you for all of our presenters. Thank you to those who attended us today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks. Oh, well, sorry, we are going to have Q&A as well. So I've got the questions open right now. If you want to go ahead and ask us through the question portal, I'll go ahead and moderate those, and then we'll have Matt, Andrew, or Ashish address those with the audience. You guys can fire away.
So one question, and this I guess is for Ashish. Can you talk a little bit about how the AvePoint tool is proactive in preventing non-compliant information from getting into, say, a document library?
Sure, yeah. So we actually do work at the API level during upload time. So we actually set an agent on the web front end of SharePoint. So that agent looks into the events that triggered an upload itself. It actually scans the document before it gets saved into SharePoint. So based on whatever your criteria is, if you want preventative measures, so based on what's in the document, we go ahead and quarantine it, delete it, reclassify it upon upload time itself in real time.
And I think you mentioned this. What is the performance impact?
Yep. Yeah, so the performance impact is actually pretty minimal in the sense that just like the other AvePoint tools in the AvePoint platform, in the DocAv platform, we iterate through the API itself. So we're not making direct database calls. We're not running more than 3 concurrent threads. So a couple things about that is it will take, it could take a few hours or a few days even to go through the scheduled basis. But upon real-time uploading, there's relatively zero impact or relatively low impact on SharePoint itself because we're literally just going through the web front end.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? All right. We don't see any more coming up in the question box. So if you happen to think of any after this, please email me. Again, it's jcall@b2btech.com. We will be sending you a link to the recording of this webinar along with a PDF that kind of goes over this offer and the benefits of the governance and compliance plans we've laid out for you. So we hope you have a wonderful afternoon and thanks for joining us.